Will-o'-the-Wisp is the most common name for the strange and mysterious lights that appear at night, leading travellers away from the well-trodden path and into danger. But across Britain they have many regional names. In Scotland they're spunkies, in Lancashire they're peg-o'-lantern, in East Anglia they're hobby lanterns, in Worcestershire they're known as pinkets, the good folk of Cornwall know them as Joan the Ward, while those in Somerset and Devon know them as hinky punks.
But here in Northumberland they're known as Jenny with the Lantern, and there's a reason for this, and it involves the ruins of this folly you can see behind me. So let's go and have a closer look. Come on.
This was built in the 18th century as an ornamental building and was used as a shepherd's cottage. The design was likely based on the nearby 14th century Crawley Tower, just over 3 miles to the west.
Now sadly in recent years this folly's been damaged considerably. I'd say more than half of it was destroyed, blown down in a storm in 2021. This is what it used to look like. So just another reason why you have to appreciate heritage and history while it's still here. It could be gone at any moment. Now the story goes that a shepherd once lived here with his wife. His wife was called Jenny, and while the shepherd would be out on the hills or the moors or in one of the nearby towns and villages, Jenny would light a lantern or a candle in the top window when it started to get dark, and the shepherd would use this as a waypoint to find his way home. He'd follow Jenny's lantern.
But one night, the shepherd was making his way home from the inn at Eglingham, following Jenny's lantern as usual. He found himself stumbling into a bog or a body of water, and he drowned that night. He never made it home. He perished very much in the same way that people perish when they encounter Will-o'-the-Wisp. At some point, this story became linked to the Will-o'-the-Wisp, and the northern name for these strange creatures became Jenny's lantern as a result. But what actually are these things? The wisp are lights, ghostly or otherworldly in nature, and they're seen at night, primarily over bogs, swamps and marshes. They appear as glowing orbs or small balls of fire, or sometimes as torches being carried by small creatures. The lonely traveller, or the individual caught out after dark, will catch a glimpse of them, and generally they'll feel inclined to follow the lights. Whether they follow the lights out of their own free will or in a trance-like state is unknown. But the wisps are more often than not malevolent and lead the traveller into a bog or swamp or towards the edge of a very high cliff, and then they'll disappear, leaving the poor soul to drown or drop to their death in the dark. In some stories though, the wisp are guardians, protecting graveyards or sacred burial sites or hidden treasure. And strangely, these ghostly lights are found all around the world, not just here in Britain. Norway, Bangladesh, Brazil, the USA, Australia, they manifest across the globe and are interpreted in many different ways by these different cultures. They've also been mentioned in a number of popular works of fiction. The Will-o'-the-Wisp are referenced in Bram Stoker's Dracula, for example. In Chapter 1, the Count, masquerading as a coach driver, takes Jonathan Harker to his castle at night time, and they see the wisp. When Harker asks Dracula about the lights, the Count tells him it's a belief that the common folk have, that they mark where treasure is hidden nearby. In Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the Will-o'-the-Wisp are present in the dead marshes outside of Mordor. When Frodo and Sam make their way through the bogs, Gollum tells them not to follow the Will-o'-the-Wisp. He tells them that if they do, they will keep the dead company.
They also get a mention in the film Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban when Snape takes over the Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson and Hermione tells them they've only just started learning about redcaps and hinky punks. Hinky punks being a regional English term for Will-o'-the-Wisp.
Let's look at the origin of the mainstream name for these creatures, the Will-o'-the-Wisp. Wisp means a bundle of sticks or paper, sometimes used as a torch, and will just means the name will. Thus, Will-o'-the-Wisp literally means will of the torch. This is very similar to the term jack-o'-lantern, meaning Jack of the Lantern. And Jack and Will share a similar story. There's a lot of crossover between the two. Many will already be familiar with the story of Jack of the Lantern, the man cast out of heaven and hell, and condemned to wander the earth forever, with only a single lump of burning coal in a hollowed-out turnip to light his way. But there's a similar story from Shropshire involving a blacksmith named Will. It's unlikely that the story was only ever present in just Shropshire. It was probably told all across the country. In any case, when he died, St. Peter gave Will the chance to live a second life. Rather than making the most of it, Will again wasted his time, and when he died, both heaven and hell refused to take him. The devil gave him a burning lump of coal from hell, so that Will could warm himself. Now he wanders among the bogs and swamps, luring travellers to their death with the light from his coal. These stories provide us with one interpretation of what the Wisp actually are: a lost soul denied entry to both heaven and hell, stuck forever in a state of purgatory. But there are many different interpretations and proposals regarding what these things are. Some believe they're spirits of unbaptized babies. Others believe them to be elves, pixies, or fairies. There are those that believe them to be spirits of the dead or ghosts. In some parts of Asia, people believe them to be the souls of dead fishermen, and there's even a South American belief that they're the eyes of a great evil serpent. Let's take a look now at some of the recorded sightings. Leon A. Hausman described seeing 7 lights around the size of golf balls while out walking one night with his wife, glowing with a colour that varied between greenish gold and pale bluish. He noted the belief that the lights are the dancing souls of little children, owing to the sightings of the flames in old graveyards, which can also explain another name for the Wisp, that being corpse candles. Lincolnshire folklorist Ethel Rudkin collected an account from a woman in which she saw a wisp between a crossroads and a gate leading to a manor house. Strangely, this light always appeared on the road. The woman described it as looking like a bicycle lamp, having the same colour and being the same distance from the road. She and her children often saw it between the hours of 8 and 10 o'clock in the evening. A policeman happened to see it one night too, and likewise thought it was a bicycle coming towards him. He stood still to let the bicycle get level with him, only it disappeared when the light reached him. Now, many will dismiss the will-o'-the-wisp as superstition and the explanations that people came up with for natural phenomena that they didn't understand at the time. They'll tell you that these lights are the product of natural gases or can be explained by science in some way. We were silly in the past, but we're enlightened now, and we know better. There are those today that think of themselves as incredibly clever by explaining that the uneducated people of the past didn't realise that they were seeing natural gases and instead thought they were seeing fairies. But this theory isn't new. It's been around for a long time, and people have been trying to prove it for centuries. The first recorded example of this explanation was by Swiss theologian Ludwig Lavater in 1596. But science has still not proven that gases are responsible for the will-o'-the-wisp, despite how widespread that belief is now. It remains just a theory. T. O'Connor Sloane describes an experiment in Scientific American designed to show how people could create their own will-o'-the-wisp. He writes how you could lower a lit candle into a glass tube held vertically. You could then light the heat rising from the tube to create a second flame, inches away from the first. Alternatively, you could light a candle, let it burn for a few moments, and then blow it out. Lighting the vapour would create another flame. This is all very interesting, of course, but it doesn't explain how this could happen spontaneously in nature and lead people into bogs and marshes. Even as recently as the 80s, the 90s and the 2000s, people have tried to recreate the Wisp in laboratory conditions. The results come into conflict with the countless eyewitness accounts of the Wisp though, from the colour to the presence of smoke that the experiments created, to the inability to retreat that people report the Wisp doing. It seems incredibly unlikely that what people have reported over the centuries are indeed just natural gases. That's to say nothing of the fact that spontaneous combustion is extremely rare or unlikely. There are other theories as well that attempt to debunk the idea that there's anything supernatural about the Wisp, from it being explained away by honey fungus, to barn owls reflecting the moonlight, to fireflies. Yet, all of these don't come close to eyewitness accounts. Maybe, just maybe, there is something otherworldly about these things. Accounts of the Wisp are infrequent now though, possibly because so many bogs and marshes have been drained, and this was the primary habitat of these creatures. But is it accurate to say that there are no eyewitness accounts now? I'm going to provide you with 2 here. The first comes from a follower of this channel that reached out to me with this encounter. He said as follows: It was early evening and not yet quite dark when I was walking along an overgrown track which skirts around a small lake in a large marshland in North Yorkshire. Bulrushes and tall reeds and grass grew out of the marsh, and it was actually a nature reserve. I was last in single file of a group of 8 people, and as I walked along I could see the top right end of the lake, and there were a number of small, misty bluish lights moving about in the bulrushes. I'd say there was about 5 of them. They were hovering above the water and moving in and out of the first few lines of reeds. There were also some more further back in the reeds, which would have been well above the water's surface for me to have seen them among the tops of the rushes. I cannot remember whether I spoke to the other people about them, as I was a quiet soul when I was 7 or 8 anyway, but I instantly knew that they were will-o'-the-wisps. They appeared just exactly like the Wisp on the 1980s cartoon of the same name that I was familiar with. The differences being that they were without distinguishable features, and that in the cartoon, the Wisp is a woodland spirit, not inhabiting marshland. I only later discovered that will-o'-the-wisps are often reported in marshlands like I had observed. They did not disappear as I approached closer, and I watched them for a good long time, until the track headed further away before the top end of the lake and into high bushes bordering the marshes. I did feel the urge to get closer to them, even though I knew it was silly, as it was impossible without falling into the marsh. But if the track had not veered away from the marsh, I would surely have wanted to follow the lights into danger.
I also believe that I've seen the will-o'-the-wisp last year, 2023, in Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire. This is what happened.
I was camping with a group of friends from different parts of the country, as we do once a year every year, this time in Sherwood Forest. We weren't camping in the section with the public pathways, the part where you can find the magnificent major oak, but we went further off the beaten track into a secluded part of the forest. We had a fire on the go, and it had been burning away for a good few hours. We'd cooked food and were chatting and relaxing, when suddenly we saw a man heading towards us carrying a red torch. Red light most likely to keep his eyes adjusted to the dark. Thinking it was a gamekeeper or a landowner, we put out the fire in an attempt to hide our camp. Silly perhaps, given that he'd surely have already seen the fire. We watched in darkness as this light approached, perhaps only about 20 metres away from us and getting closer. We hid behind trees hoping he'd not see us, ignoring the fact that he'd obviously see our tents. But we waited a minute, and no man came into the camp. The light was still there, but it didn't look like the moving torch we thought it was initially. It looked like a bobbing flame or orb of light. It was still moving, but it was further away now. We were all very curious now as to what this was, so we followed it, getting deeper and deeper into the woods as the orb of light moved further and further away. Eventually, we reached the end of the woodblock and came upon a gravel road, and the light was now way out in the distance over the moorland. Very odd. The light had literally been right on top of us back by the campsite. Was this will-o'-the-wisp? Whatever it was, this was the footage that I recorded of this encounter.
So I probably should give a bit of an introduction, but this is Ava. She's 4 months, and she's going to be joining me in some of my videos on some of my adventures. I'll let you have a closer look. Go on, say hello.
The Wisp is still said to be seen in the Jenny's Lantern moorland area, although if you want to catch a glimpse it would be best to go at night. But why this area? Is there anything special about it? Well, on the southern slope there's an Iron Age hill fort, interesting from the ground but quite magnificent from above. There's been human settlement in this area for thousands of years.
So with so much history here, so many settlements and forts in this tiny area alone, this quiet, forgotten corner of England just outside of Alnwick, maybe the spirits of those peoples are the will-o'-the-wisp in these parts. Maybe.
We'll likely never know what the will-o'-the-wisp really are. Unlike pretty much every other video you'll see that discusses the wisp, my conclusion is not one that involves marsh gases or fireflies. I believe that the will-o'-the-wisp are land spirits or something similar to what traditional folklore describes. My own experience in Sherwood Forest has led me to this conclusion. But I respect everyone's opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think the Wisp are. In any case, if you've enjoyed this video, then please do consider sharing it and helping me grow this channel. You can also support my work via Patreon, link in the description. I'm very grateful to my current patrons, whose names you can see on the screen right now. These people help me get out into the field and film all of these stories on location so you can really get a feel for where they all took place.